Okay, my name is Verge Manyen, and my story is called Back from the Verge, and this is the story of my recovery from suicidal depression and anxiety. Um, so my story has a really nice dramatic beginning. It was January 13th of 2012. I was actually driven from my doctor's office to the emergency room in the back of a police car. I had just filled out a questionnaire. I went in, I was feeling depressed. A lot of things were happening in my life. And I went to see my doctor, and they asked me to fill out a questionnaire to determine whether I was suffering from depression. I think it was 10 questions. And, by the time I had answered the one of, do you have a plan to commit suicide? And I knew I had a really good, well thought out plan, something I had been considering for a long time. It was a total eye opener. I mean, it made me realize how bad things really were. And I was literally led through the lobby of my doctor's office by the police, and I stood outside. They patted me down. And as funny as it sounds, it was a total relief. I mean, I actually felt like something was going to change now. And I remember sitting in the back of that police car. Only time in my life I've ever sat in the back of a police car. I wasn't under arrest, but they took me to the emergency room, and basically they put me in a room where I couldn't hurt myself. And I talked to a psychiatrist and I talked to a psychologist, and just that, couple of hours just made this huge impact on me. Just the fact that I had kind of just raised my hand and said, hey, I'm drowning over here, and I didn't have anyone to help me. And so I'll give a little more background on how I got to that state. There were a whole bunch of things that happened just right in a row, almost right on top of each other. So I was working a contract position, and they told me, such and such day, and I think it was, January 28th or something, is going to be your last day working here, a couple days before Christmas. So I literally spent a week sitting on the floor of an office building by myself working. I was the only one there, and I knew, number one, nobody's going to be here to say goodbye to me. I'm going to pack up my stuff, I'm going to leave my ID on this desk, and I'm not going to have a job. And I wasn't able to find, I was still looking, I hadn't even found a new job yet. So that's the lead up to my Christmas. Christmas Day, I call my father's house. He lives back in Michigan, and I know he's been having a hard time. He seems to have been having some kind of issues with his mental health. And I call his house, Christmas Day, phone's disconnected. So this phone has had that number like almost since phones were invented. Like, it's never been disconnected. So I know something's wrong. And so I call my uncle's house, and he lives right across town. They're really close. They've known they've lived across town from each other for their whole lives. And I come to find out my uncle's dead. So lost my job, no prospect in sight. My uncle's passed away, and nobody knew how to get a hold of me. And I find out my father's lost his home, and nobody knows where he is. And he's obviously suffering from severe mental illness that I didn't understand. So that was my Christmas Day. And then the other thing that I wasn't realizing was that over the course of about the last decade, my partner and the mother of my only child, who's been homeschooling my child for his whole life, that she has slowly become an abusive alcoholic, and that has just become normal for me. So I'm not even realizing that what's happening. I mean, I realize it, but I don't understand the extent to which it's affected my life. So those are all these things that were happening in my life. So that's about 6 years ago. So this story does have a happy ending. I'll just give that away right now. I mean, I can't even tell you, like, it makes me want to cry just thinking about all the amazing things that have happened to me since then. So I wanted to tell this story so that people who are suffering from suicidal depression and anxiety or any form of mental illness, that like you can not just survive it, but you can actually become a happy person. And that's what's happened for me. And I know that the reason I really wanted to kill myself was because I couldn't see that I could ever actually be happy. I knew I could keep myself alive, And I felt like I should do that for my son, but I actually reached a point where I was so miserable that I thought my son would be better off if I were just dead. That was why I made the plan. That was why I made the doctor's appointment. So I'll give you a little knowledge on like how this all turned around. So I started going to therapy. You know, I was so far gone. I was so depressed that they couldn't give me any form of medication because they were concerned that, you know, some of these have a side effect of suicidal ideation. So that was hard, you know. There wasn't any way someone could just give me some kind of immediate relief. But what I started doing is I started just getting outside and doing things like ride my bike as hard as I possibly can. Just find the steepest hills I can find and charge up them. And I was just pushing my heart, like making myself kind of flood my system with adrenaline and endorphins. And it would give me this short period where I just felt like, you know what, things are going to be okay. Like, you know, you're going to get through this. And then it was kind of like there was a weight on you at all times at this point in my life. And then that would just come back. As soon as all the adrenaline wore off, it would just come back again. And so then I got back into playing the drums, and I had given up playing drums. I spent my 20s traveling all over the country, going up into Canada, East Coast, and playing in a rock and roll band. And I kind of gave up that lifestyle when we had our son, and I just decided I needed to do some other things to make money. But I knew I had to get that back. So basically I told my ex, you know, we're cleaning out that room downstairs and I'm going to start a band. And this is part of my therapy. And then I started talking to people, bringing people in, and there's a guy named Matt Aker and another guy named Travis Ziegler. And those guys are like my brothers now. And those were the first guys that I brought down. We just had such an amazing time. I play in bands with both of those guys now. But I told them specifically, before we even played together, we got together, just had a beer, had a cup of coffee. And I said, hey, you know, like I was going to kill myself. That's why I'm starting this band, because I need to recover. And I'm just so depressed. And this is going to help me get through this. So I learned this lesson right away about vulnerability, that people don't necessarily run away just because you tell them that there's something wrong. Like they actually are attracted to the fact that you're being open and telling them what's happening with you. And around the time that I was starting back into the drumming, I had this amazing event that happened to me that taught me like this huge lesson just right away. I was riding my bike to work and I hit a patch of black ice. And you couldn't see this. It was just completely, it was like invisible. And it was completely frictionless. And I went down just the bike. I was down on one knee, you know, and my bike's like this, and I'm just going along. And I literally just at the same speed, I'm not slowing down whatsoever. And I'm just going down the street. And there's a car next to me as this happens. And the car starts doing this. And it's right next to me, but I can see it's not going to hit me. And we actually lock eyes. The driver and I just kind of lock eyes, and we both are just kind of like, what the hell is going on here, you know? And we're kind of laughing because it's just the weirdest thing. And so finally we get to the end of this patch of ice, and I pick myself up, and the guy checks to see I'm okay. And I realize as I ride off that was the calmest I had felt in years, like in as long as I could remember. That was the calmest I had felt, because there was nothing. I just all of a sudden had this time where there was nothing I can do right now, and I could just be in the moment. And I realized that I needed to figure out a way to just be in the moment more in my life, not worry about the job situation, not worry about my father, not worry about the things that are happening in my exterior life, and just have this time where I put all that aside. And then it wasn't long after that that I got in touch with the drum circle community here in Madison. And there's a really amazing community here in Madison. So if anyone's interested, you can find us on Meetup. You can get a hold of me through Facebook, and I can get you in touch with the community. But yeah, a few years later, it took me still 2 or 3 more years to finally leave my ex. I had to go through Al-Anon and learn a bunch of lessons that way too. But when the actual physical separation occurred, I was just feeling super lonely, kind of dragging around this empty house. And I thought, I should try and check out this drum circle. I know there's a good one that happens here. But at the same time, I didn't like drum circles. I had been to some in the past, and I just kind of felt like, it's kind of hippie-ish, and they're not really that good at drummers, the ones I had been to. And so I literally took this old beat-up pair of bongos, and I tuned them up, and I stuffed them down in a duffel bag. And so the plan was I could go to this thing that's happening. It was on the Library Mall here. And if I thought it seemed stupid, I would just walk by and they wouldn't know the difference because they, So I wasn't even committing to even just staying there. But yeah, I walked down to the Library Mall and it was really, really cool. And these guys were just freaking jamming, man. Like there's a really good core group of drummers in Madison, unbelievable. And people were dancing. It was in the middle of the day, like in a super public place, and all these people were just kind of letting it all hang out. And I wasn't quite ready to let it all hang out, but I sat down and started playing, and I just let it go. I just let everything go. And I didn't have to talk to anybody. I didn't have to try to make friends or tell anybody my story. I could just sit there and just rip out whatever I felt like. And these guys were so good, I could play anything I wanted to. And I was probably there for like 3 hours, I think. And by the end of it, I just felt like a different person almost. And now, of course, like a whole bunch of those people are my really good friends. And I do a lot of organizational stuff with drum circles. And I'm working on helping people as therapy through drum circles. So if you want to be part of that, you can find me on Facebook, Verge Manyen. So that was just another super significant thing that I did for myself. And to me, it's really self-expression. You don't really have to play drums, but finding something in your life where this is just, I'm presenting who I am, and like nobody gets to tell me I can't, and there's nobody's gonna judge me. If you have anything like that in your life, or if you want to start doing something like that, just start doing it now. I mean, it's like, you can't start too soon or too late. It could definitely save your life. So a couple of other things that I've learned along the way that I think I see it's lacking in people's lives. One thing is I reconnected with all these old friends back in my hometown. I went to my high school reunion. That was pretty unbelievable, my 30-year high school reunion. And then I had also become estranged from my family, and that happens a lot when you're involved with an alcoholic, because your life kind of tends to become a very small cosmos. So I reached out to them, and I told all these people what was happening in my life. Like I told people who hadn't even talked to me in 30 years. Like I was just honest about, I'm in this recovery from this thing that happened to me. And it was amazing how many other people started opening themselves up to me. And one of the funnest stories about the whole high school reunion thing is, so at one point, I'm there and I'm just talking to people, and this old friend of mine, she comes up to me, she says, you know what, did you know Barbara Chamberlain is here she's here, have you talked to her? This is someone I've known since 5th grade, her and this person. And I was terrified of this person because I had a crush on her, like for everybody I knew had a crush on her back in the day. And I was just like, oh yeah, that's great, like, what about it, And she literally pulls me over to talk to her. And I'm still pretty terrified. And so we talked for quite some time. It was the end of the night. At the time, like nothing really came of it. But, as time went on, I was doing more social media stuff, and I was joining bands. So I was kind of just becoming a little bit more public with all these things I was doing, especially with my recovery. And she kind of latched onto that and thought it was really cool. So we'd have these little interactions just through Facebook. So, eventually what happened was we reconnected in a pretty significant way, and we actually started a long-distance relationship. She was in California, and I was here in Madison, and we did that for an entire year, traveling back and forth. And, I'd found this person now who she just totally knew who I was. She knew everything about me. She knew all the challenges I'd had, and we discussed those things amongst ourselves. And she moved here like about 5 months ago, so now we have this incredible relationship, which that's just something that I never was even trying to do. I was basically just trying to recover my own mental health and physical health, and sure enough, like just putting yourself out there as the person that you are, like that's how you find someone who wants the person that you are. And so of course that's something that I can't emphasize enough is, know who you are and put it out there and don't be afraid. And if people don't like it, they don't have to like it. You have to learn how to love yourself. And another thing that I would also mention is, I had to really learn about boundaries. That was the big thing that Al-Anon taught me. Just this whole idea that like no one else in your life has the right to abuse you. And that was like a really hard lesson for me to learn because, when you're with someone for many, many years, I was with Max for 23 years and we were deeply in love for like the first half of that time. And as things get to, things get more and more difficult and you just kind of let that person do what they're going to do to you. And it's almost, you feel almost as if you owe it to them. And this happens to so many people. I see it happening around me still all the time. And, you have to have these boundaries in place and you have to be able to tell people like, look, what you're doing to me is not acceptable. Like I consider this to be abusive. And if you keep doing it, I can't continue to be around you. And whether it's your friend, whether it's a family member, you give them that chance to redeem themselves. But in the end, you have to protect yourself. And I found it to be really hard when you're in a situation with someone who has an addiction problem that you feel sorry for them. And it's easy to feel sorrier for them than you feel for yourself. And you start giving up some of that right that you have to not be abused. So it's just like a lesson of knowing when you have to kind of put the armor on and make this really hard decision. And then when you can take it off and try to take it off as soon as you can. I guess the very last lesson I would teach people is that, when you have to do something like have a divorce, or leave someone you've been with for a long time, when you're in a relationship with an alcoholic in particular, it's kind of like, I came up with this analogy, it's like you're inside of a burning house and, the exits get covered right away by the flames. Now you don't want to run through the exit because you're going to have to run through the flames. And so you just keep waiting and you just keep waiting and you still don't want to do it. Next thing you know, you're in the only room in the house that isn't actually on fire. Now you got to run through a hell of a lot more flames to get out of the place or you're going to die. And that was literally the position I was in, was like I was either going to die or I was going to run through the flames now. And it was like that. I ran through the flames. I didn't see my son for 6 months. We've since repaired ourselves to this amazing degree where he sends me funny texts all day long and stuff. But, what was cool about that whole thing was that I ran through those flames and it seemed like it took forever. But at the end, like, that's just over now. And it's not easy. Like, it's taken me years to get to where I am. So, I guess I just would wrap this whole thing up with, you can be happy, like, almost no matter what your situation is right now. I could go on for another hour of other things that have happened to me that I had to overcome along the way. But you have to care about that. Like, you have to push yourself and know that, what's that eventual goal and what are things I can do to get there. And how can I spend enough time in the moment that I don't feel freaked out? What are things I can do to express myself? How can I get rid of toxic people in my life and bring in people who care about me? Which is like another last thing I would add is that I have hundreds of people, like literally hundreds of people in my life now that I can trust. And I know they have my back. And I think we need more of that in our society. But I don't really expect someone to not kill themselves just to not kill themselves, like, because I understand that the reason why you want to do it is because you feel you can never find happiness. I would rather just tell people you can actually be happy, even if you still have depression, even if you still have anxiety, no matter what mental illness you suffer from. I truly believe that if you work hard enough and change your life and change as many of those parameters as you can in positive ways, that you can be a happy person in the end. I still have depression, I still have some anxiety, but really I don't have any idea what that feeling was like anymore. That physical feeling is completely gone from my life. And once every 6 months, I might feel really down. Well, now everybody knows what to do because I communicated. So, just hang in there. You can make things work. You can become a super happy, well-adjusted person and have a life that you never imagined. And, I want to be the person, I wish when I was in that situation that the new me had been able to come and show up and tell me these things and tell me you're gonna actually be happy. So that's the reason I'm telling this story, and I hope that people get some value out of it. And thanks for letting me do this.